Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back to a time when the wind didn't just howl. It sang a very long, very cold lullaby. Imagine standing on a vast, golden prairie under a sky so wide it feels like it might swallow the horizon. You probably believe that winter always waits for December to show its face, like a polite guest arriving exactly when the invitation says. But history has a funny way of crashing the party early, turning a golden autumn afternoon into a frozen white world, before you even have a chance to find your heaviest coat, before you get too comfortable, and possibly fall asleep halfway through. Tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. Go ahead and leave a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. It is always nice to see where in the world we are all resting our heads tonight as we travel back to the snowy plains of the 19th century. Now, dim the lights. Let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So, settle in and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. The year is 1880, and you are standing in the middle of the Dakota Territory. The air is surprisingly soft for the middle of October, carrying the scent of dried tallgrass and the lingering heat of a late harvest. You look out across the landscape, and all you see is a sea of amber and gold. The big bluestem grass, which grows taller than a man's waist, ripples in the breeze like the waves of a gentle ocean. It is a peaceful time, a time for finishing the work of the summer and preparing for the quiet months of rest that usually come with the end of the year. You feel the sun on the back of your neck, warm and reassuring, a golden weight that suggests the world is exactly as it should be. You are wearing a simple linen shirt and sturdy trousers, and your boots are coated in the fine, dark dust of the prairie soil. Life here is simple, slow, and measured by the movement of the sun across the sky. You lean against the rough, unfinished wood of your small claim shanty. This little house is your pride, though a modern eye might call it an ambitious shed. It is a single room, built of wood, and perhaps a bit of sod for extra weight against the wind. It is what people today might call an open, concept living space, mostly because there are no interior walls to speak of, just one square room where you sleep, eat, and dream of the future. You think about the winter ahead, imagining it will be like the ones before. A few months of cold, some snow for the children to play in, and plenty of time to sit by the stove and read by the light of a kerosene lamp. You have no reason to suspect that the weather is about to break all the rules. There is no 5-day forecast on a glowing screen in your pocket. No satellite imagery to show the massive, swirling systems gathering far to the north. Your only weather app is the behavior of the birds and the thickness of the fur on the farm dogs. As you walk toward the edge of a nearby slough, a small marshy area where the water is still and clear, you notice something unusual. The muskrats have been busy, far busier than usual. You stop and watch them as they work with a strange, frantic energy. They are building their houses in the shallow water, but they are not the usual size. These houses are massive, with walls twice as thick as you have ever seen them. You run a hand over your chin, wondering why these small creatures are building such heavy fortifications. It is a quirky little detail, a piece of local lore that the old-timers always talk about. They say that when the muskrats build thick walls, the winter will be long and hard. You smile to yourself, thinking it might just be a particularly productive year for the local rodents. You aren't quite ready to believe that a muskrat knows more about the future than you do, but the sight stays with you as you walk back toward your door. Historians still argue whether the local settlers truly understood the warning signs offered by the wildlife, or if the suddenness of the storm simply overrode any natural intuition they possessed. Some say the people of the plains were deeply in tune with the earth, while others suggest that the desire for a successful harvest made them ignore the growing chill in the evening air. Regardless of what was known, the reality was moving toward you with a speed that no one could have anticipated. The afternoon sun begins to dip toward the horizon, but instead of the usual orange and pink glow, the sky starts to take on a strange, bruised color. It is a deep, heavy purple that seems to press down on the land. You notice the wind shifting. It was blowing gently from the south just an hour ago, but now it is coming from the north, and it has a sharp, biting edge to it. It isn't just a cool breeze. It is a cold that feels like a needle against your skin. You pull your collar up, feeling a sudden shiver that has nothing to do with the setting sun. The silence of the prairie changes too. The birds that were chirping in the grass have gone quiet, hiding away in the thickets. The only sound is the dry rattle of the grass as the wind picks up speed. You decide it is time to head inside and start the fire. You reach for the heavy iron handle of your stove, feeling the cold metal through your calloused palms. You strike a match, and the small flame flickers, casting long, dancing shadows against the wooden walls. The smell of burning wood begins to fill the room, a comforting, familiar scent that usually signals the end of a long day. You sit on a wooden bench, watching the light dance. You think about the chores for tomorrow. Maybe you will finish cutting the hay or check the roof one last time. You are still thinking in the language of autumn, unaware that the season has already ended. By the time the moon should be rising, there is no light at all. The sky is a solid wall of darkness. You hear a sound against the window pane, a soft, dry tapping. At first, you think it might be dust or sand carried by the wind, but when you hold a lamp up to the glass, you see white streaks. It is snow, not the soft, fluffy flakes of a picturesque Christmas morning, but hard, tiny grains of ice that strike the glass with a persistent, rhythmic intensity. The wind begins to growl around the corners of the shanty, finding the small cracks in the doorframe and whistling through them. You feel a draft of freezing air move across your ankles, and you realize that your 19th century insulation is basically a mix of hope and a few layers of newspaper pasted to the walls. You wrap a wool blanket around your shoulders, feeling the weight of the fabric. It is scratchy and thick, smelling slightly of sheep and wood smoke. You find yourself wondering if you have enough wood for a long cold snap. The calendar says it is October 15, 1880. This is the date that would later be etched into the history of the American West as the beginning of the most brutal winter on record. This first blizzard which arrived so early it caught the crops still standing in the fields, would last for 3 full days. It was a storm that moved with a relentless, blinding fury, turning the familiar world into a white void where even the path from your house to the barn could become a deadly maze. You try to peer through the window again, but the glass is already beginning to frost over. The ice forms delicate, fern-like patterns that grow before your eyes, crystalline structures that reflect the orange glow of the fire. Outside, the world is disappearing. You can no longer see the barn, which is only 30 feet away. You can no longer see the fence or the well. There is only the white, swirling chaos of the wind. You realize that you are completely alone. In the late 1800s, there is no way to call a neighbor or check on a friend. You are a small island of warmth in a vast, freezing sea. You feel a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you realize that the situation is entirely out of your control. There is no cancel button on a blizzard, no way to reschedule the weather. You simply have to wait. The wind grows louder, a deep, resonant roar that makes the entire shanty tremble. You can feel the power of it, a physical force that pushes against the walls. You think about the pioneers who came before you, and those who will come after, and how small we all are when the earth decides to show its strength. You adjust your blanket and move closer to the stove. The heat is a precious thing, a thin barrier between you and the absolute zero of the prairie night. You find yourself thinking about the modern world, though of course, you have no word for it, and you imagine what it would be like to have a house that didn't shiver when the wind blew. But for now, you have your fire, your blanket, and the steady, rhythmic sound of the snow against the roof. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the storm become a backdrop to your thoughts. You think about the wheat you were supposed to harvest. It is likely buried now, crushed under the weight of the drifts. You think about the cattle in the lean-to, hoping they are huddled together for warmth. You feel a pang of worry, but it is a soft, distant thing, muffled by the exhaustion of the day. The cold has a way of making you feel heavy, as if your limbs are made of the same thick mud that lines the river banks. You find yourself sinking into the wooden bench, the hard surface feeling surprisingly comfortable as sleep begins to pull at the edges of your mind. The storm outside shows no signs of slowing down. It is a relentless, driving force that seems to want to score the land clean. You imagine the snowflakes as tiny architects, building massive drifts that will reshape the landscape by morning. Some of these drifts will grow to be 20 feet high, covering entire houses until only the chimneys are visible, like small stone pipes sticking out of a white sea. You have heard stories of people getting lost in their own yards, wandering in circles just a few feet from their doors until the cold took them. It is a sobering thought, but in the warmth of your shanty, it feels like a dark fairy tale. You decide to bank the fire for the night, carefully arranging the logs so they will burn slowly and keep the room from freezing while you sleep. You move with a slow, deliberate grace, your shadows stretching and shrinking against the walls. The flickering light catches the edges of the few books you own, their leather spines worn and familiar. You realize that this winter is going to be different. It isn't just a season, it is an event. You can feel it in the air, a sense of gravity that wasn't there yesterday. The world has changed its tone, shifting from the light, breezy melody of summer to a deep, somber bass note that vibrates in your chest. You climb into your bed, which is a simple wooden frame with a mattress filled with dried corn husks. It rustles as you move, a dry, crunchy sound that reminds you of the fields. You pile on the quilts, heavy, handmade things filled with scraps of wool and cotton. They are a history of your family in fabric, a patchwork of old dresses and worn-out shirts. Under the weight of 5 or 6 quilts, you feel safe. The cold still creeps in around the edges, a thin finger of ice that touches your cheek, but the core of you is warm. You listen to the shanty groan as the wind hits it, a sound like a great ship at sea. You find yourself drifting in and out of sleep, your thoughts tangling with the sounds of the night. You imagine you are walking through the tall grass again, but instead of being golden, it is made of silver and glass. The sun is a pale, white disk that gives no heat. You wake up for a second when a particularly loud gust of wind rattles the door, and you check to make sure the latch is secure. It is. You are locked in, and the world is locked out. There is a certain peace in that, a total lack of responsibility for anything other than staying warm. As you drift off again, you think about the quirky muskrats and their thick, walled houses. You wonder if they are warm in their mud, and reed fortresses tucked away beneath the ice of the slough. You decide that, for now, you will take a lesson from them. You will stay in your house. You will keep your walls thick with blankets, and you will wait for the light to return. The long winter has begun, but you are ready for the first chapter. The snow continues to fall, a silent, white blanket that is slowly covering the world, one tiny grain at a time. The sound of the wind becomes a low hum, a steady vibration that lulls you deeper into your pillows. The fire in the stove settles, a log shifting with a soft, glowing hiss as it collapses into embers. The room grows darker, the orange light fading into a soft, charcoal gray. You are warm, you are safe, and the storm is just a song being sung by the wind. You let your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the house as it settles into the cold. The Dakota Territory is a vast, empty place, but tonight, your world is only as large as the reach of your blankets. You are a part of history now, a witness to the beginning of a legend. The morning will bring a world you don't recognize, a landscape rewritten by the frost. But that is a worry for another time. For now, there is only the warmth, the dark, and the soft, persistent memory of the golden grass. The frost on the window has grown thicker, turning the glass into a white, opaque stone. It blocks out the night, creating a barrier between you and the infinite space outside. You feel the heavy, comforting presence of the quilts, a mountain of fabric that anchors you to the earth. You are drifting, floating on a sea of sleep, while the blizzard rages on the other side of the wood. It is a long way until morning, and an even longer way until spring, but you are exactly where you need to be. The history of the long winter is being written in the snow outside, but inside, the only story is the slow, steady beat of a heart at rest. You sink deeper into the corn, husk mattress, the rustling sound fading away until there is only the silence of the snow. The morning light that filters through the frost-covered window is not the bright, cheerful yellow of a typical dawn. Instead, it is a soft, ethereal blue, a color that feels cold to the eye even before you move a muscle. You lie still for a moment, buried under the heavy weight of your quilts, watching your breath bloom into a thick, white cloud in the air above your head. It is a strange thing to see your own breath inside your house, a silent reminder that the boundaries between the world outside and your sanctuary have become very thin. The air in the room is so still it feels heavy, and the silence is absolute. The roar of the wind has died down, leaving behind a world that seems to be holding its breath. You eventually find the courage to pull one arm out from under the blankets, and the immediate sting of the air against your skin makes you rethink every life choice that led you to the middle of a prairie in 1880. You sit up slowly, the corn husk mattress rustling beneath you like a field of dry ghosts. Your boots, which you left near the stove last night, look like two dark, frozen stones on the floorboards. You realize that if you are going to survive the months ahead, your little shanty needs to become a fortress. This house was built quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly, to meet the requirements of the Homestead Act of 1862. This famous law required you to build a permanent dwelling, usually at least 12 feet by 14 feet with a window, to prove you were serious about improving the land. Historians still argue whether the government truly expected people to survive in these tiny wooden boxes, or if the law was simply a way to fill the empty spaces on the map with hopeful souls. To you, however, the law is less important than the fact that you can currently see the outdoor scenery through a gap in the wall, where two boards didn't quite meet. Your first task of the day is to address these gaps. In the world of 19th century home improvement, there are no hardware stores with aisles of silicone sealant or spray foam insulation. Your toolkit consists of whatever you can find, which mostly means old rags, bits of dried mud, and a thick stack of newspapers. You begin the slow process of chinking the walls. You take strips of cloth and use a dull knife to stuff them into the cracks between the boards. It is a rhythmic, meditative task. You push the fabric in deep, feeling the resistance of the wood. You can feel the cold air trying to push back, a tiny, freezing jet of wind that whistles against your fingers until the cloth finally blocks its path. You might think of this as the original tiny house movement, except without the trendy light fixtures or the wheels. As you move around the room, you realize that the walls themselves are radiating cold. The pine boards are thin, and they offer about as much thermal protection as a wet paper bag. You decide to use your newspapers as wallpaper. This was a common practice on the plains, and while it might look like a college of a very slow news day, it actually works. You mix a little flour and water to make a simple paste, a sticky, white goo that smells faintly of bread. You brush it onto the back of the papers and press them against the wood. You find yourself reading the headlines from 3 months ago as you work. Stories about politics in Washington and advertisements for tonic that promises to cure everything from the vapors to a broken heart. It is a quirky piece of history that many settlers lived inside a house literally made of news. You imagine that if you get bored during a storm, you can just walk around the room and catch up on the events of last summer. It is a very slow version of scrolling through a news feed, and thankfully, there are no pop-up ads to deal with. The shanty is small, but every square inch requires your attention. You look at the door, which is hanging slightly crooked on its leather hinges. The gap at the bottom is large enough for a determined mouse or a very cold breeze to enter at will. You find an old sack made of heavy burlap and nail it across the bottom of the door. It isn't pretty. In fact, it looks like your house is wearing a very poorly fitted sock. But it stops the draft. You feel a small sense of victory. In this environment, survival is a game of inches. You are not fighting the winter, you are negotiating with it, trying to keep just enough warmth inside to see the next sunrise. You move toward the stove, the heart of your home, and realize that the woodpile you thought was so impressive yesterday now looks dangerously small. To keep the house warm, you need to understand the physics of the prairie. Because there are so few trees in this part of the country, wood is a luxury that you have to use sparingly. You have some coal, but the trains that bring it are now stuck behind miles of snow. You find yourself looking at the large pile of dried hay in the corner of the room. This is your backup fuel. It is a fringe tidbit of history that many pioneers survived the winter by burning. Prairie coal, which was just a polite name for dried animal droppings or tightly twisted bundles of grass. You spend an hour sitting on the floor, twisting long strands of hay into hard, tight knots. Each one takes about a minute to make, and they burn in about the same amount of time. It is a lot of work for a little heat, but the movement keeps your hands warm, and the rhythmic twisting of the grass is strangely soothing. You find yourself laughing softly at the absurdity of it all. If someone from the city could see you now, sitting on a dirt floor and making logs out of grass, they would probably think you had lost your mind. But on the prairie, normal is a relative term. You decide that your architectural style is desperate minimalism, and your interior design philosophy is whatever keeps the toes attached. You think about the modern comforts you've heard of. The grand houses in the East with central heating and indoor plumbing. They seem myths from a different planet. Here, the most luxurious thing you can imagine is a pair of socks that doesn't have a hole in the heel. By noon, the sun has moved higher, but the light remains dim. You decide it is time to face the world outside. You wrap yourself in layers of flannel shirt, a wool vest, a heavy coat, and 2 pairs of trousers. You tie a scarf around your face until only your eyes are visible, making you look like a very cold bandit. You grab your shovel and move to the door. When you pull it open, you are met not with a view of the yard, but with a solid wall of white. The snow has drifted over the door, packing it tight from top to bottom. It is a strange sensation to stand in your doorway and look at a vertical wall of ice. You begin to dig. The snow is not soft. It has been packed by the wind into something resembling soft marble. You cut out blocks of it, stacking them to the side. As you work your way out, you realize that the snow is actually helping you. The massive drift that has buried your shanty is acting like a layer of insulation, protecting the wood from the biting wind. It is an old trick of nature, the igloo effect. By burying you, the storm has unintentionally made your house warmer. You decide to leave the snow piled high against 3 of the walls, only clearing a narrow, trench-like path to the barn. Walking through this trench is like moving through a white canyon. The walls of snow are higher than your head, and the sky above is a narrow strip of pale gray. As you shovel, you notice the tracks of small animals. A rabbit has hopped along the top of the drift. its light weight allowing it to stay on the surface. You feel a pang of jealousy for the rabbit. It doesn't have to worry about the homestead act or twisting hay into knots. You reach the barn, if you can call it that, and check on your livestock. The cow is standing in the center of the small space, her breath coming in slow, rhythmic puffs of steam. She looks at you with large, dark eyes that seem to ask why the world has turned white. You give her a pat on her flank, feeling the warmth of her body. You realize that the animals are just as much a part of the house's heat system as the stove is. In some sod houses, the family and the animals would even share a wall to take advantage of the shared warmth. It is a cozy, if somewhat smelly, arrangement. You spend the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the roof. The weight of the snow is immense, and you can hear the rafters groaning under the pressure. You use a long pole to knock the heaviest drifts off the edge, watching the white powder explode as it hits the ground. You have to be careful. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of house collapses during this winter was the weight of the snow or the use of green, unseasoned wood that warped in the cold. Either way, you don't want to find out the hard way. You work until your shoulders ache and your fingers feel like stiff wooden pegs. The physical labor is exhausting, but it provides a sense of purpose. In the face of a giant, uncaring winter, shoveling a path feels like a grand rebellion. You return to the shanty as the light begins to fail. The temperature is dropping again, the kind of drop that you can feel in your teeth. You go back to your newspapers and flour paste, adding another layer to the north wall. You find an article about a summer festival in a distant town with descriptions of lemonade and shade trees. You read it twice, letting the words conjure up the feeling of heat on your skin. It feels like reading a science fiction novel about a world with a different sun. You realize that your perception of time is changing. The future is no longer next year or next month. It is just the next time the stove needs to be fed. You settle back onto your bench and prepare a simple meal. You have a sack of potatoes and some dried meat. You roast a potato on top of the stove, the skin turning dark and crisp. The smell is heavenly, a simple, earthy aroma that fills the small room. You eat it slowly, savoring the heat. You think about the suicide of cattle that sometimes happen during these storms. Animals that would get so disoriented and cold, they would simply walk into the wind until they collapsed. It is a sobering thought, a reminder that the land is indifferent to life. To survive here, you have to be more stubborn than the storm. You have to be like the grass, flexible but rooted deep in the soil. The humor returns as you try to find a comfortable way to sleep while wearing 3 layers of clothes. You look like a human onion, and moving your arms requires a significant amount of coordination. You imagine a modern fitness coach telling you that this active lifestyle is great for your core strength, while you would much rather be sitting on a sofa eating a slice of cake. You realize that you haven't seen another human face in days. The isolation is a physical weight, but it also brings a strange clarity. The noise of the world, the gossip, the politics, the worries of the town, has been silenced by the snow. There is only the wind, the fire, and the steady beat of your own heart. You look at the walls of your shanty, now covered in the words and stories of the world you left behind. You have built a fortress out of paper and rags and stubbornness. It isn't much, but it is yours. The wind begins to pick up again, a low whistle that turns into a steady hum. You don't feel the fear you felt the night before. You have prepared. You have chinked the gaps. You have twisted the hay, and you have dug your path. You climb back into bed, the corn husks crunching a familiar welcome. The weight of the quilts is a comfort, a heavy, warm embrace that tells you it's okay to let go of the day. As you drift toward sleep, you think about the muskrats again. You wonder if they are currently sitting in their thick, walled houses, perhaps judging your newspaper, wallpaper choices. You hope they are warm. You hope the cow is warm. You let your mind wander through the snowy trench you dug, imagining the moon reflecting off the white walls. The world is cold, yes, but your small square of it is held together by flour paste and wool. You find yourself smiling at the thought of the desperate minimalism, style becoming the next big thing. Maybe you are a trendsetter, a pioneer of more than just land. The fire in the stove is low, a soft red eye in the darkness. It hums a quiet tune as the last of the twisted hay bundles catches fire. The warmth lingers in the air, a gift from the grass you harvested when the sun was still gold. You feel your muscles relax, the tension of the shoveling and the shivering slowly melting away. You are a small, warm spark in a vast, frozen wilderness, and for tonight, that is enough. The long winter has many more chapters to tell, but your fortress is ready. You sink into the mattress, the silence of the snow acting as the perfect blanket for your mind. You think of the scholarly debates and the historical facts, and they feel very far away. What matters is the texture of the quilt against your chin, and the fact that the draft from the bottom of the door has finally stopped. You are learning the language of the winter, a language of endurance and quiet strength. You are no longer just a person living on a claim. You are becoming part of the prairie itself. The snow continues to fall outside, adding another layer to your white roof, another inch of insulation for your tiny, paper-lined world. You close your eyes, and the blue light of the window fades into the soft, velvet dark of a well-earned rest. The house settles with a soft groan, the wood contracting in the cold. It sounds like a sigh of relief, as if the shanty itself is settling in for the night. You are safe. You are warm. You are ready for whatever the morning brings, even if it is just another wall of white to dig through. The story of the long winter is just beginning, and you are its silent, sleepy protagonist. You let the rhythm of your breathing match the slow, steady pulse of the freezing earth, and you drift away into a dreamless, peaceful sleep. The world has a different weight today. You wake up not to the sound of the wind, but to a silence so heavy it feels like a physical presence against your ears. The frost on the window has grown even thicker, creating a jagged, white landscape of ice that mimics the drifts outside. You lie there for a moment, listening to the house. Every house has its own voice, and today yours is speaking in tiny, sharp pops as the wooden beams contract in the deepening cold. You wonder if the world has simply ended and left you behind in this little wooden box. But then, drifting across the frozen miles of the prairie, you hear it. It is a long, low, mournful sound that cuts through the stillness like a knife through soft butter. It is the whistle of a steam locomotive. You move quickly, or at least as quickly as a person wearing 4 layers of wool can move. The sound of that whistle is a lifeline. In 1880, The railroad is more than just a way to travel. It is the iron artery that keeps the prairie alive. It brings the coal that feeds the stoves, the flour that fills the bellies, and the letters that keep the heart from becoming as frozen as the ground. You know this might be the last time you hear that sound for a very long time. You pull on your heavy boots, feeling the stiff leather protest against your feet. You grab your coat and your scarf, wrapping it tight around your face, until you look like a very cozy mummy. You step out of your door and into the trench you dug yesterday, the white walls of snow rising up on either side of you like the walls of a silent, frozen marble hallway. The walk to the town is a slow, rhythmic struggle. Each step is a negotiation with the snow, which has a way of finding its way into even the smallest gaps in your clothing. You walk along the path that has been roughly cleared by other settlers, a narrow line of dark earth and packed ice that snakes through the white expanse. You pass other people along the way. They move like ghosts, shadows in the mist, their faces obscured by wool and frost. No one speaks, the air is too cold for words, and the effort of breathing is enough to keep everyone silent. You simply nod as you pass, a silent acknowledgement of the shared struggle. It is a strange, quiet parade of hopeful souls heading toward the sound of the iron horse. As you crest the final hill and look down into the town, you see the train. It looks like a massive, dark beast huddling against the white platform of the station. Great clouds of white steam billow from its sides, rising up to meet the gray sky in a chaotic dance of heat and ice. The smell hits you before you reach the tracks. The sharp, acrid scent of burning coal and the heavy, metallic aroma of hot oil and grease. It is the smell of civilization, and it feels intoxicating after days of breathing nothing but the clean, sterile scent of snow. You reach the platform just as the engine lets out a final, hissing sigh, its massive wheels coming to a reluctant halt. The crowd around the train is dense but quiet. Everyone is waiting for something. You watch as the crew begins to unload the cargo. There are heavy sacks of flour, crates of salt pork, and, most importantly, the dark, gleaming lumps of coal. In this era, coal is more valuable than gold. Without it, the houses on the prairie will become little more than wooden iceboxes. Historians still argue whether the railroad companies truly understood the peril they were putting people in by encouraging them to settle so far from reliable fuel sources, or if they were simply caught off guard by the sheer ferocity of this particular season. Either way, the sight of the coal falling into the waiting wagons brings a sense of relief that is almost tangible. You can feel the tension in the crowd ease slightly, a collective exhale that turns into a massive cloud of steam in the freezing air. You find yourself standing near the front of the locomotive, looking up at the massive wedge-shaped plow attached to its nose. This is the wedge plow, a standard piece of equipment designed to push snow off the tracks. It looks formidable, a great shield of iron meant to defy the elements. However, you notice the scratches and dents in the metal, the way the paint has been scarred off by the abrasive force of the ice. A quirky little tidbit of history is that these plows were often weighted down with tons of scrap iron just to keep the train from flying off the tracks when it hit a particularly hard drift. It was a brutal, physical battle between man's machines and nature's geometry. You imagine the engineers inside the cab, their faces blackened by soot, peering through the small windows as they barrel into walls of snow at 40 miles an hour, hoping the tracks are still beneath them. It is a job that requires equal parts courage and a complete lack of self-preservation. The work of unloading continues with a slow, grinding efficiency. You watch as a man receives a small bundle of mail, his gloved hands trembling as he tucks it into his coat. A letter from back east, from a mother, a sister, or a friend who is currently sitting in a warm parlor, probably complaining about a light frost. You imagine the content of those letters, filled with news of weddings and harvests, blissfully unaware that the recipient is currently living in a world where the sun has become a distant memory. You find yourself smiling at the thought of a luxury item you saw being unloaded, a single crate of dried apples. In a few weeks, those apples will be remembered as if they were pieces of the finest silk. The atmosphere on the platform begins to shift. The conductor, a tall man with a silver watch chain and a face that looks like it was carved out of an old tree, looks at the sky. The gray clouds are thickening, turning a deep, leaden color that suggests another storm is only hours away. He checks his watch and then looks at the engineer. There is no conversation, just a shared look of urgency. They know something the rest of the town is only starting to realize. The window is closing. The tracks behind them are already filling with snow, and if they don't leave now, they might be stuck here until May. You watch as the engineer pulls a lever and the locomotive begins to roar. It is a deep, rhythmic thrumming that you can feel in the soles of your boots and the center of your chest. The steam bellows out again, momentarily obscuring the station in a warm, white fog. You hear the heavy clack of the couplings as the train begins to move. A slow and deliberate departure. The wheels spin for a moment on the icy rails, sending up a shower of sparks that look like tiny, dying stars in the gloom. Then the train finds its grip and begins to pull away from the station. You stand there on the platform, watching the red light on the rear car fade into the distance. It is a haunting sight. As the train disappears, it feels like the last thread connecting you to the rest of the world has been snipped. You are no longer part of a great, interconnected nation. You are once again just a small group of people on a frozen island of grass. The Great Snow Blockade, as mainstream history would later call it, has officially begun. The railroad officials back in the city will soon realize that clearing the tracks is a futile effort. They will send plows, and the plows will get stuck. They will send men with shovels, and the wind will fill the holes as fast as they can dig them. Eventually, they will simply stop trying. A light snow begins to fall, tiny grains of ice that settle on your eyelashes. You turn away from the tracks and look back toward the town. The people are moving away now, hurrying back to their own fires. You follow them, your mind filled with the image of the train's receding light. You think about the modern world, a place where you might expect a package to arrive on your doorstep within 24 hours, and where a delayed train is considered a personal insult from the universe. Here, the train is a miracle, and its departure is a tragedy. You decide that your new hobby will be waiting for the sound of a whistle. Though you suspect you won't be very successful at it for the next few months. The walk back to your shanty feels longer than the walk to town. The excitement of the train's arrival has worn off. replaced by a cold, hollow realization of the isolation ahead. You look at the tracks as you cross the edge of town, and you can already see the snow beginning to drift over the iron rails. They look like two silver lines being slowly erased by a giant, white hand. In an hour, they will be gone. In a week, you won't even be able to tell where they were. The prairie will return to its original state, a vast, trackless wilderness that doesn't care about steam engines or coal contracts. You reach your shanty and duck inside, the warmth of the small stove greeting you like an old friend. You take off your layers, feeling the blood return to your frozen fingers with a stinging, itchy heat. You sit by the window and look out, though there is nothing to see but the encroaching dark. You think about the engineer and the conductor, wondering where they are now. Are they currently plowing through a 10-foot drift? Are they safe in a station further down the line? Or are they, too, sitting in a dark cab, waiting for the wind to die down? You feel a strange sense of kinship with them. You are all players in a very long, very cold play, and the stage has just been locked. Historians still argue whether the winter of 1880 was a freak occurrence or a sign of a larger climatic shift that the settlers were simply unprepared for. Some suggest that the solar cycles of the time contributed to the unusual frequency of the blizzards. To you, it doesn't really matter why the snow is here. It only matters that it is. You find yourself looking at your small supply of coal, the dark stones glowing with a dull, oily light in the lantern glow. You have enough for a few weeks if you are careful. After that, it's back to the twisted hay. You decide to treat the coal like fine jewelry, only using it when the temperature drops so low that the water in the bucket starts to freeze near the stove. The humor of the situation strikes you as you look at your single luxury from the town, a newspaper that was left on the platform. It is dated October 2nd. You have already read every word of it, including the advertisements for Thomas's Electric Oil and the Great Sale on Men's Heavy Overcoats in a store 300 miles away. You realize that you are now the most well-informed person in a 3-mile radius, provided that everyone only wants to know the news from 3 weeks ago. You imagine starting a town crier service, but then you realize that the only people to cry to are your cow and the frozen muskrats in the slough. They are probably not interested in the election results or the price of wheat in Chicago. You settle into your chair, the wood creaking under your weight. The shanty feels smaller tonight, but also more secure. You have seen the last train. You have witnessed the end of the world as you knew it, and the beginning of a different, more primal existence. The sounds of the storm are starting to pick up again, the wind finding its voice as the sun disappears. It is a low, moaning sound that seems to vibrate through the very marrow of your bones. You close your eyes and imagine the train tracks, buried deep beneath the white, lying silent and cold like the ribs of a prehistoric giant. You find yourself drifting into a state of half-sleep, where the sounds of the wind and the memories of the train whistle blend together. You imagine the train is still out there, a ghost ship sailing through a sea of white, its whistle blowing for eternity. You think about the snow sheds. They build in the mountains, massive wooden tunnels that protect the tracks from avalanches. You wish you had a snow shed for your entire life, a long, wooden tunnel that would take you straight to April. But life on the prairie doesn't come with tunnels. It only comes with shovels and a very stubborn refusal to give up. The fire in the stove is a steady, comforting presence. You watch the flickering orange light play across the newspaper-covered walls, turning the stories of the outside world into a shifting, golden tapestry. You feel the weight of the isolation, but you also feel a strange, quiet power. You are surviving. You are standing your ground against a winter that has already defeated the most powerful machines of the age. The train could not stay, but you are still here. The tracks are gone, but your path remains, even if it is only a narrow trench between your house and your barn. As you prepare for bed, you move with the slow, deliberate care of someone who knows that every movement counts. You check the latch on the door one last time, feeling the cold metal bite into your skin. You look at the frost on the window, which has now formed a perfect, crystalline forest. It is beautiful in a terrifying, frozen sort of way. You climb into your corn husk mattress, the dry rustling sounding like the memory of the summer fields. You pull the quilts up to your chin, feeling the familiar weight and the faint scent of wood smoke. You think about the quirky tidbit you heard in town, that some people have started using their children's sleds to move coal from the station because the horses are too weak to pull the wagons through the drifts. It is a funny image, in a dark sort of way, the serious work of survival being carried out on a child's toy. You decide that if you ever have children, you will tell them that sleds are for more than just fun. They are the heavy machinery of the prairie. You let your mind wander to the possibility of a rotary snowplow, a new invention you heard someone mention. It has a giant spinning fan that throws the snow to the side. It sounds like something out of a dream, a magical machine that could eat the winter. But for now, you only have your shovel and your arms. The darkness of the shanty is complete now, save for the faint, red glow of the stove's air vent. You listen to the snow hitting the roof, a sound like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping on the wood. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that pulls you deeper into the pillows. You are a long way from the tracks now. You are a long way from the whistle and the steam. You are in the heart of the long winter, and the silence is your only companion. You let your breathing slow, the cold air in the room feeling crisp and clean in your lungs. You are drifting, floating away on the memory of a train that is no longer there, moving toward a sleep that is as deep and white as the drifts outside your door. The last thing you think of before sleep takes you is the conductor's silver watch. You imagine the hands of the watch moving slowly, marking the seconds of a winter that feels like it will never end. But the watch keeps moving, and so does time. The train is gone, but the spring is still out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, waiting for its turn to arrive. You sink into the dark, the silence of the prairie wrapping around you like a heavy, frozen blanket. You are safe. You are warm. You are part of the history of the snow, a silent witness to the year the tracks disappeared. The cold has a way of becoming a permanent resident in your home. It no longer feels like an outside force trying to get in. It feels like a quiet, invisible guest that has settled into every corner, every crack in the floorboards, and every fiber of your clothing. You wake up and notice that the water in the basin next to your bed has frozen solid, a smooth, white disk of ice that looks back at you like a blind eye. You realize that your supply of coal, those precious black stones you treated like diamonds, has finally dwindled down to a few handfuls of dust at the bottom of the bin. The snow blockade has been in effect for weeks now, and the trains are nothing more than a memory or a legend told to children. To keep the temperature inside the shanty above freezing, you have to turn to the only thing you have left in abundance, the dry, golden hay that you harvested back when the world was warm. You move to the corner of the room where the hay is piled high. It is a massive stack of wild prairie grass, smelling of summer and dust. It feels strangely light and fragile in your hands, yet it is now the most important substance in your world. You sit on the floor, your back against the newspaper-covered wall, and begin the work that will occupy most of your waking hours. You take a handful of the long, coarse stalks and begin to twist them. You use your wrists in a firm, circular motion, winding the grass tighter and tighter until it resembles a thick, hairy rope. Then, you double it over and tuck the ends back into the middle, creating a hard, dense knot about the size of a large loaf of bread. These knots are often called hay cats or sticks, a quirky bit of pioneer slang that historians still enjoy discussing today. You find yourself smiling at the thought of herding cats into your stove, though these cats don't meow, and they certainly don't like to be petted. You realize that you have accidentally joined the most exclusive and least popular gym in the world. This is the pioneer version of a high-intensity interval workout, except instead of a sleek water bottle and upbeat music, you have a pile of dry grass and the constant fear of your toes turning blue. You imagine a modern fitness coach telling you that this functional movement is excellent for your forearm strength, while you would much rather be sitting on a beach with a drink that has an umbrella in it. The process is repetitive and hypnotic. Twist, fold, tuck, twist, fold, tuck. Your hands begin to develop a rhythm, a steady beat that matches the slow thrum of the wind outside. The dust from the grass rises in the dim light of the lantern, dancing in the air like tiny, golden insects. You find that you have to be careful not to breathe too deeply, or the dry chaff will make you cough. It is a dusty, messy, and exhausting way to live, but as you throw the first cat into the stove, the reward is immediate. The grass catches fire instantly, sending up a bright, cheerful flare of orange light that illuminates the whole room. For a few glorious seconds, the heat is intense and wonderful, a brief reminder of what it feels like to be truly warm. However, the problem with burning grass is its efficiency, or lack thereof. A hay cat burns with a fierce, hot flame, but it vanishes in a matter of minutes. This means that to stay warm, you must feed the stove almost constantly. You are now a servant to the fire, a stoker on a ship that is going nowhere. Historians still argue whether the physical exhaustion of constantly preparing fuel or the psychological weight of knowing the fuel would never last was the greater burden for families during the long winter. You decide it's a tie as you reach for another handful of grass. You are living in a cycle of fire and fodder, where every hour of warmth requires an hour of labor. It is a very direct, very honest way to live, but it doesn't leave much time for hobbies like wood carving or contemplating the meaning of life. You find yourself looking at your stove with a new sense of respect. It is a standard cast iron model, but you have heard that some people in the territory are using specialized Mennonite burners, or grass burning stoves. These are quirky inventions with long cylinders that you pack with hay and then slide into the firebox. It's like a giant, grassy cigar for your house. You wish you had one of those fancy contraptions now, as you prepare yet another twist of wild bluestem. Instead, you have to do it the old-fashioned way, one knot at a time. You realize that you are literally burning your autumn labor to survive the winter. The grass that was meant to feed the cattle through the spring is now being sacrificed to keep the humans from freezing. It is a harsh math, a cold calculation of survival that the prairie forces you to make every single day. As the afternoon progresses, the shanty fills with the scent of burning hay. It is a sweet, grassy smell, like a summer bonfire. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine you are outside at a harvest festival, rather than trapped in a wooden box, buried under 6 feet of snow. The light from the stove door flickers against the newspaper on the walls, making the printed words seem to jump and dance. You find yourself looking at an advertisement for a self-heating flat iron and laughing at the irony. You are currently a self-heating human, and the process is much more complicated than the ad suggests. You think about how people in the future might look back at this time and see it as romantic or adventurous. You decide that if you ever meet a historian from the future, you will hand them a pile of hay and a pair of cold boots and tell them to experience the romance for about 8 hours. The work is interrupted only by the need to check on your water supply. You take the frozen disk of ice from the basin and set it on top of the stove. You watch as the edges begin to melt, a thin ring of liquid appearing around the white center. It is a slow process, a visual representation of how everything in this winter happens at a glacial pace. Nothing is fast, and nothing is easy. You have to plan your water, your heat, and your light hours in advance. You are no longer living in minutes. You are living in the time it takes for a hay cat to turn to ash or a block of ice to turn to tea. The isolation of the winter starts to play tricks on your mind. In the silence between the gusts of wind, you think you hear voices or the sound of a distant bell. You know it's just the house settling or the wind playing over the chimney pipe, but it makes you realize how much you miss the sound of another human. Even a light-hearted argument about the price of eggs would be a luxury right now. You find yourself talking to the fire, thanking it for the warmth as you toss in another bundle of grass. You are becoming a person of the plains, someone who understands that the environment isn't something to be conquered, but something to be endured with as much grace and humor as you can muster. You decide to take a break from twisting and move to the window. You have scratched a small hole in the frost, a tiny porthole into the outside world. All you see is white. The drifts have reached the roofline in some places, and the sky is a flat, featureless gray. It is a landscape without shadows, a world that has been erased by the frost. You realize that mainstream history often focuses on the big events, the battles, the elections, the gold rushes, but the real history of the West is written in small moments like this. It is the history of a person sitting on a dirt floor, twisting grass into knots so they can live to see another gray morning. It is a history of stubbornness, of a refusal to be extinguished by the cold. The humor returns as you think about your interior decorating choices. The hay pile is shrinking, which means you're open. Concept. Living room is getting more spacious by the hour. You imagine a modern real estate agent praising the rustic textures and natural insulation of your home. You wonder if, hey, burning chick will ever become a trend in the big cities. Probably not, you decide, unless they figure out a way to automate the twisting process. You look at your hands, which are stained a faint green from the grass and covered in small, harmless scratches. They are the hands of a worker, a survivor, and they are currently the only things keeping the frost at bay. The evening begins to settle in, and the temperature outside takes another sharp dive. You can hear the wood of the shanty popping and cracking with more urgency. Now, you decide to increase your production. You work faster, your hands moving with a blurred efficiency. Twist, fold, tuck. Twist, fold, tuck. You create a mountain of hay cats, enough to last you through the night. If you wake up every few hours to stoke the fire, you feel a strange sense of pride in your mountain of grass. It isn't much, but it is a buffer against the infinite cold. It is your defense, your ammunition in the war against the long winter. You prepare a simple dinner of hardtack and a bit of the salt pork you've been rationing. You heat a cup of water on the stove, using the last of the afternoon's intense flames. The water is hot and tastes slightly of the hay smoke, but it is the most comforting thing you have ever felt. You hold the tin cup in both hands, letting the heat seep into your palms. You think about the Great Snow Blockade, and the fact that there are dozens, maybe hundreds, of people in similar shanties all across the territory doing exactly what you are doing. You are part of a silent, invisible community of grass twisters, all of us working in the dark to keep the sparks of life flickering. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of this winter on the settlement of the plains. Some say it slowed the growth of the region for a generation, while others believe it forged a unique kind of resilience in those who stayed. To you, it feels less like forging resilience and more like trying not to freeze while covered in dust. But perhaps that's what resilience actually looks like. Not a grand speech or a heroic charge, but the quiet, repetitive act of making another hay cat when you are tired and cold, and the wind won't stop howling. You move your bed closer to the stove, dragging the corn husk mattress across the floor. You want to be within arm's reach of the firebox, so you don't have to fully emerge from your quilts to add fuel. You pile the hay cats within easy reach, creating a small wall of grass next to your pillow. It is a cozy, if somewhat flammable, arrangement. You realize that you are living a life of extreme nesting, turning your environment into a cocoon of wool and grass. You feel like a burrowing animal, a prairie dog or a vole tucked away beneath the surface of the snow. The wind picks up again, a deep, resonant roar that makes the shanty shudder. You throw 2 more hay cats into the stove and watch the flames roar up the pipe. The light is a warm, pulsating orange, casting long shadows that flicker across the ceiling. You feel the heat on your face, a dry, intense warmth that makes your skin tingle. You pull the heavy quilts up to your chin, feeling the weight of them. They are your second line of defense, the thick wool trapping the heat of the fire and the heat of your own body. You are a small, warm heart beating inside a mountain of snow. You find yourself drifting off to the sound of the fire. It is a lively, crackling sound, very different from the steady hiss of coal. It sounds like a conversation, a series of quick, bright whispers that tell stories of the summer sun and the waving fields of grass. You imagine the grass is happy to be warm again, even if it is only for a few minutes in a cast iron stove. You think about the quirky tidbit you heard once about people using the ash from burned hay as a primitive kind of soap. You decide that you have enough chores for now, and that making soap from the remains of my heater can wait for another day. The humor of your situation is a gentle, persistent thing. You are a person of the 19th century, a pioneer of the great frontier, and your primary technological achievement today was successfully turning a plant into a brick. You imagine the people of the future living in houses that stay warm all by themselves, with no grass twisting required. It sounds like a paradise, but you also wonder if they will miss the connection to the earth that you feel right now. You are literally being kept alive by the land you claimed. The relationship is intimate and direct. The prairie gave you this grass, and now the grass is giving you its life in the form of heat. You close your eyes, and the image of the golden fields returns. You can see the wind rippling through the bluestem, a sea of amber under a bright, blue sky. You can feel the heat of the sun on your back, a heavy, golden weight that never ends. That sun is still there, stored inside the dry stalks of the hay cats next to your bed. You are burning the summer to survive the winter, a beautiful and poetic trade. You let your breathing slow, matching the rhythmic pulsing of the stove's light. The shanty is small, the world is white, and the hay is dusty, but you are warm. As you fall deeper into sleep, you find yourself thinking about the muskrats again. You hope they have enough hay cats in their mud houses. You hope the whole world is finding a way to stay warm tonight. You are drifting on a sea of grass, the dry, sweet scent filling your dreams. The wind can roar all it wants. You have your fortress, your fire, and your mountain of twisted gold. You are a survivor of the long winter, and tonight, the grass is your greatest ally. You sink into the mattress, the soft rustle of the corn husks sounding like the distant memory of a harvest wind. The fire settles, a soft glow emanating from the stove's vents. The room is quiet, save for the occasional pop of the wood and the steady, rhythmic breathing of a person at rest. You are a small spark of life in the center of a frozen continent, and you are doing just fine. The morning will bring more twisting and more shoveling, but for now, there is only the peace of the fire and the warmth of the quilts. You are drifting, floating, sinking into a sleep as deep and silent as the drifts that cover your roof. The morning arrives with a quiet, hollow feeling in your stomach that no amount of sleep can quite mask. You lie in the dim light of the shanty, watching the frost on the window glow with a pale, milky light. The warmth from the stove has ebbed away during the night, and the air in the room is sharp and thin. You reach for your boots, which feel like heavy iron weights, and pull them onto your cold feet. You realize that the small bag of flour you were using for your morning biscuits is finally empty. You shook out the last few white dustings yesterday, and now there is nothing left but the memory of bread. You turn toward the corner of the room, where a heavy burlap sack sits. It is filled with whole kernels of wheat. The same wheat you harvested in the heat of August, meant to be sold at the elevator in town. Since the trains have stopped and the mills are locked behind miles of snow. These hard, golden kernels are the only thing standing between you and a very long fast. You reach into the bag and pull out a handful of the grain. The kernels are small, hard and smooth, clicking against each other like tiny stones. You know that you cannot eat them as they are. They are like little pebbles of gold that require a great deal of persuasion to become food. You look at your small coffee mill bolted to the wall near the window. It is a simple cast iron machine with a wooden drawer at the bottom and a long, curved handle on top. It was designed to grind coffee beans for a few minutes each morning, providing enough for a pot of coffee. It was never intended to be the primary flour mill for an entire household. You realize that your day is about to be defined by a single, repetitive motion. You are about to become the human engine for the world's slowest and most stubborn food processor. You pour a cup of the wheat into the hopper at the top of the mill. The sound of the grain hitting the metal is a bright, cascading noise in the silent room. You take hold of the wooden knob on the handle and begin to turn. The resistance is immediate. The kernels do not want to be crushed. You have to lean into the motion, using the weight of your shoulder to force the handle around in a circle. You hear the low, rhythmic growl of the metal teeth biting into the grain. It is a deep, grounding sound that vibrates through the wall and into your arm. This is the start of the coffee mill workout, a fitness program that you didn't sign up for and which offers no benefits other than the occasional slice of coarse bread. You imagine a modern nutritionist telling you about the benefits of whole grain, artisanal, hand-processed flour, and you decide that you would gladly trade all that health for a single loaf of soft, white store-bought bread. The work is slow, painfully slow. It takes nearly an hour of constant turning just to produce enough flour for one small loaf. Your arm begins to ache, a dull throb that starts in your wrist and moves up to your neck. You switch hands, finding that your left arm is significantly less enthusiastic about the task than your right. You find yourself counting the rotations, trying to find a rhythm that makes the time pass. 1, 2, 3, 4. You watch the tiny wooden drawer at the bottom. You pull it out to check your progress, and you see a small pile of tan-colored dust. It is not the fine, silky flour you are used to. It is gritty and dark, filled with bits of bran and germ. It is honest food, perhaps the most honest food you have ever seen. But it looks like it might be better suited for building a brick wall than for making a cake. Mainstream history often notes that the wheat frontier was the backbone of the prairie economy, but it rarely dwells on the sheer physical labor required to turn that economy into a meal when the infrastructure failed. You are living the reality that the history books summarize in a single sentence. You are experiencing the grind in the most literal sense possible. Historians still argue whether the stories of people living for months on nothing but coffee, mill bread were slightly exaggerated in later memoirs to emphasize pioneer hardship, or if it was truly the universal experience of the 1880 winter. As you feel the sweat begin to bead on your forehead, despite the freezing air in the room, you are inclined to believe every single word of those memoirs. The effort required to produce a single calorie seems to take 2 calories of work to achieve. It is a strange, exhausting math that makes every bite feel like a hard-won trophy. As you work, you notice a quirky tidbit of your current existence. Your coffee mill is finally living up to its name, but not in the way you expected. Since your supply of real coffee beans vanished weeks ago, you have been experimenting with substitutes. You have heard of people using roasted barley, dried peas, or even acorns to create a dark. Yesterday, you took some of the wheat kernels and roasted them on top of the stove until they were dark brown and smelling of toasted nuts. You then ran them through the mill. The resulting liquid is dark and hot, and if you close your eyes and use a significant amount of imagination, you can almost pretend it tastes like coffee. In reality, it tastes like a very angry piece of toast. But the warmth of the cup against your hands is more important than the flavor. You call it Pioneer Mocha, and you decide that you will not be sharing the recipe with any fancy cafes in the future. The humor of the situation is a quiet, persistent companion. You are a person who owns land, a house, and 1,000 bushels of grain. Yet you are currently spending 4 hours a day just to avoid being hungry. You are wheat, rich, and flour, poor. You imagine a wealthy businessman from the city coming to visit and seeing you hunched over a coffee mill like a determined squirrel. You would offer him a cup of your toast water and a piece of your brick bread, and you suspect he would be back on the train. If there were any trains. Within the hour, you realize that your standards for what constitutes a good day have shifted. A good day is now any day where the mill doesn't break and the hay cats stay lit long enough to bake the dough. By noon, you have finally accumulated enough flour to begin the baking. You mix the course meal with a little water and a pinch of salt. You don't have any yeast or sourdough starter left, so the bread will be unleavened. A hard, dense Johnny cake that could probably double as a doorstop in an emergency. You shape the dough into a flat disc and place it in a heavy iron skillet. You set the skillet on top of the stove, which you have fed with a fresh pile of twisted hay. The smell of the baking bread begins to fill the shanty, and it is the most wonderful aroma you have ever encountered. It is the scent of survival. It is earthy, sweet, and incredibly comforting. It fills the small space, pushing back the sterile, cold scent of the snow and the dust of the hay. You watch the bread carefully. Because the flour is so coarse, it doesn't brown in the way normal bread does. Instead, it turns a deep, golden tan, and the edges become crisp and hard. You use a knife to flip it over, the metal making a sharp, scraping sound against the iron. You can feel the heat radiating from the stove, a dry, intense warmth that makes your skin feel tight. You find yourself leaning toward the heat, soaking it in like a plant following the sun. The isolation of the winter makes these small sensory experiences, the smell of the bread, the heat of the fire, the weight of the skillet, feel massive and significant. They are the anchors that keep you grounded in a world that has become nothing but white wind and gray sky. When the bread is finally done, you take it off the heat and let it cool for a moment. You break off a piece, and the steam rises in a thin, elegant curl. The texture is rough and chewy, and you can feel the individual grains of wheat. It requires a lot of chewing, which is probably good, as it makes the meal last longer. The taste is surprisingly rich, a deep nuttiness that you never noticed in the processed flour from the store. You realize that you are eating the very essence of the prairie. This grain grew in the soil outside your door, drank the rain of last July, and soaked up the sun of August. Now it is giving that energy back to you. It is a perfect, closed circle of life, though you wouldn't mind if the circle involved a bit less manual labor. As you eat, you think about the quirky bread debates you've heard about. Some people insist that adding a bit of potato water makes the coffee mill bread softer, while others swear by a spoonful of molasses if you have it. You have neither potatoes nor molasses, so your bread is the purest version. You decide to call it solitude scones, and you imagine them being served at a very high-end restaurant where the theme is post-apocalyptic Victorian. The lack of neighbors to share it with is the only downside. You find yourself thinking about the families in the nearby claims. Are they also sitting by their stoves, turning their handles, and chewing their hard bread? You feel a sense of silent community. Thousands of coffee mills are likely turning, at this very moment across the territory, a hidden orchestra of grinding metal and crushing grain. The afternoon is spent in more grinding. You realize that if you want to have bread for tomorrow, you have to start now. The sun begins its early descent, casting long, blue shadows across the snow outside. The light in the shanty turns a deep, amber color, reflecting off the newspaper-covered walls. You find yourself reading a small article about a newly discovered island in the Pacific, where the trees are always green and the fruit falls into your lap. You laugh at the contrast. Here, the only thing falling into your lap is wheat dust and the occasional bit of hay. You decide that the people on that island are probably very bored, and they definitely don't have the impressive forearm muscles that you are currently developing. Historians still argue about the long-term nutritional impact of the long winter on the children of the plains. Some suggest that the lack of variety in the diet led to subtle health issues, while others argue that the whole grain nature of the coffee mill bread actually provided better nutrition than the refined flour of the period. You don't feel particularly refined or nutritious. At the moment, you just feel tired. But there is a certain satisfaction in the exhaustion. You have provided for yourself. You have taken a raw material and, through sheer force of will and muscle, turned it into life. It is a primal feeling, a connection to the very roots of human existence that is often lost in more comfortable times. The sound of the mill becomes a sort of background music to your thoughts. You find yourself drifting into a light trance, the circular motion of your arm becoming automatic. You think about the mainstream history of the railroads again. They were supposed to be the great conquerors of distance, the machines that made the frontier obsolete. But the winter of 1880 showed that nature could still pull the plug whenever it wanted. The iron rails are still there, buried under 20 feet of snow, as useless as a silver spoon in a desert. The only machine that matters right now is this small, cast iron mill and the human heart that keeps it turning. You feel a strange sense of superiority over the locomotives. They are stuck, but you are still moving. You are still grinding. As the light fades, you light a small tallow candle. The flame is tiny and flickering, casting a soft, yellow glow over your work. You decide that you have enough flour for 2 days now, and you allow yourself to stop. You lean back against the wall, your muscles sighing in relief. The silence of the room returns, but it is no longer the heavy hungry silence of the morning. It is a quiet, productive silence. You look at the small pile of flour on the table, and it looks like a treasure. You realize that you have a new appreciation for the simple things. A piece of bread is no longer just a side dish. It is a masterpiece of engineering and endurance. You prepare a final cup of toast coffee and sit by the stove. The wind is starting to rise again, a low whistle that promises another blizzard by morning. You listen to the sound, but it doesn't bother you as much as it did before. You have your bread, you have your hay, and you have your fortress. You are a part of the history of the plains, a silent figure in a vast, white landscape, holding your ground with a coffee mill and a stubborn heart. You think about the scholarly debates about pioneer resilience, and you decide that resilience isn't a grand quality. It's just the ability to keep turning a handle when your arm wants to fall off. The humor returns as you think about your gym membership. Again, you imagine a future where people pay money to go to a building and lift heavy things, just for the sake of lifting them. It seems like a very strange concept. Why lift a heavy weight when you could be grinding wheat? You decide that the people of the future must be very strange indeed. You look at your hands, which are dusty and calloused, and you feel a sense of quiet pride. These are the hands that are beating the winter. These are the hands that are keeping the fire of life burning in the middle of a frozen wasteland. You finish your drink and move to your bed. The corn husk mattress rustles as you settle in, a sound that reminds you of the harvest. You pull the heavy quilts up to your chin, feeling the weight and the warmth. You are tired in a way that feels good, a deep, honest exhaustion that leads to a dreamless sleep. You think about the kernels of wheat in the bag, each one a tiny promise of another day. You think about the coffee mill, waiting patiently on the wall for the morning. You are ready for tomorrow. You are ready for the grind. As you drift off, the sound of the wind becomes a soft, rhythmic hum that matches the memory of the mill's turn. You are floating on a sea of golden grain. The sun is warm on your face, and the world is full of the smell of baking bread. The long winter is still outside, but inside your mind, it is always harvest time. You let the thoughts of historians and facts fade away, replaced by the simple, steady beat of a heart that knows it has done enough for today. You sink into the dark, the warmth of the quilts wrapping around you like a heavy, silent hug. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you is the soft, settling sound of the ashes in the stove. It is a gentle, domestic sound that speaks of safety and rest. You are a survivor, a pioneer, and a master of the coffee mill. You have turned the hard heart of the wheat into the soft heart of a meal, and that is a victory worth celebrating. You close your eyes, and the world of white drifts away, replaced by the deep, velvet dark of a peaceful night. The morning will bring the handle and the grain, but tonight there is only the silence and the well-earned rest of the weary. The silence of the shanty has become a heavy, suffocating thing. It is no longer a peaceful quiet. It is the silence of a clock that has run out of tension, a world that has simply stopped. You look at your grain bag and realize that despite your hours at the coffee mill, the bottom of the sack is visible. The hunger is no longer a polite suggestion. It is a constant, gnawing presence that sits in your stomach like a cold stone. You know that the town is in the same condition. The stores are empty, The coal bends are filled with nothing but dust and echoes, and the snow blockade has turned the territory into a collection of isolated islands. You hear a rumor, or perhaps it's just a hope whispered into the wind, that there is a settler some 20 miles to the south who has a hidden store of wheat, a bounty he raised on a new claim that the railroad never reached. You realize that someone has to go. Someone has to step out of the safety of their burrow and navigate the white void to find the thread of life. You spend the morning preparing for what can only be described as a 19th century suicide mission, though you prefer to think of it as a very long, very cold stroll. You begin by layering your clothes until you feel more like a structural pillar than a human being. You wear every pair of socks you own, followed by a layer of rags wrapped around your feet, all stuffed into boots that you have greased with animal fat to keep out the moisture. You look at yourself in the small, cracked mirror on the wall. Between the scarves, the heavy coat, and the felt hat tied down with a woolen muffler, you look like a very disorganized mountain of laundry. You decide that your fashion style is Arctic despair, and you suspect it won't be hitting the runways of Paris anytime soon. You imagine a modern hiker with their Gore-Tex and GPS units, and you find a small, dark humor in the fact that your high-tech survival gear consists of a piece of charred wood. This is a quirky tidbit of history that you put into practice now. The charcoal mask. You take a piece of burnt wood from the stove and rub the black soot under your eyes and across your cheekbones. In a world of blinding, infinite white, the sun reflects off the snow with a ferocity that can literally burn your retinas, a condition known as snow blindness. The charcoal helps absorb the glare, making you look like a very tired raccoon, but it might just save your sight. You have also heard of some settlers carving snow goggles out of thin scraps of wood, with tiny horizontal slits to look through. It is a primitive but effective way to survive the white out, and you feel a strange sense of kinship with the ancient travelers of the far north who used the same tricks thousands of years ago. Historians still argue whether the famous wheat trek of the long winter, most notably the one undertaken by young Almanzo Wilder and Cap Garland, was a single, heroic event or a composite of several desperate scouting trips made by various settlers. Some suggest that the romanticized version in later memoirs smoothed over the raw, terrifying reality of being lost in a landscape where the horizon doesn't exist. To you, standing at the edge of your dug-out trench and looking at the open prairie, the debate feels very academic. The reality is that there are no landmarks. The fences are buried, the roads are gone, and the world is a flat, featureless sheet of white that meets a flat, featureless sheet of gray. Navigating this is less like walking and more like sailing a ship across a sea of frozen milk. You step out of the trench and onto the surface of the snow. The crust is hard and brittle, making a sharp, cracking sound with every step. It is a rhythmic, punishing noise that echoes in the stillness. You find that you cannot walk in a straight line by instinct. Your body naturally wants to veer to one side or the other. You have to use the wind as your compass. You feel the cold air pressing against your left cheek, and you vow to keep that pressure constant. If the wind shifts, you are lost. It is a terrifying thought, but you push it to the back of your mind. You focus on the sastrugi, the long, sculpted ridges of snow shaped by the wind. They look like frozen waves or the ribs of a giant, white animal. They provide the only texture in a world that has been sanded smooth by the frost. The physical effort of walking through the snow is immense, even though the crust holds your weight most of the time. Every few minutes you break through, your leg plunging into a soft pocket of powder up to the hip. It takes a massive burst of energy to haul yourself out, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. You find yourself moving in a state of hyper-awareness. You notice the way the light changes, the subtle shifts in the gray of the sky. You notice the tiny crystals of frost dancing in the air, what scientists call diamond dust. They are beautiful, shimmering like ground diamonds, but they are also a sign that the temperature is so low that the moisture in the air is freezing instantly. You are breathing in ice, and you can feel it cooling your lungs from the inside out. The humor returns briefly as you realize you are currently participating in the world's most dangerous game of the floor is lava, except the floor is freezing, and there is no couch to jump onto. You imagine a modern sports commentator narrating your progress. And here we see the settler attempting the 3-mile-per-hour limp, a bold move in these conditions. You realize that your only audience is a lone hawk circling high above, a tiny dark speck against the gray. You wonder if the hawk is impressed by your persistence, or if it's just waiting for you to become part of the landscape. You decide that you are too stubborn to provide a meal for a bird today. You have wheat to find. You have a fire to return to. As the hours pass, the isolation begins to weigh on you. The silence is so absolute that you can hear the sound of your own blinking, a tiny, moist noise that feels incredibly loud. You find yourself talking to your boots, encouraging them to keep moving. You are no longer a person with a name and a history. You are just a collection of survival instincts moving through a void. You think about the mainstream historical fact that during this winter, the temperature stayed below zero for weeks at a time, with some blizzards lasting for 100 hours without a break. You are currently in a clear patch, a brief window of visibility that feels like a miracle. You know that if the wind picks up and starts to swirl the loose snow, you will be blind in seconds. You will be standing in the middle of a white out, where up and down, left and right, all disappear into a swirling, dizzying chaos. You reach a small rise and look south. In the distance, you see a tiny, dark smudge against the white. It is so small you think it might be a trick of your eyes. A snow mirage, caused by exhaustion and the charcoal on your face. But as you move closer, the smudge takes shape. It is a chimney, then a roofline. It is a shanty, nearly buried in a massive drift, with only the top of the door visible. You feel a surge of hope that is so strong it actually makes your knees weak. You reach the house and begin to clear the snow away from the door with your gloved hands, moving with a frantic, desperate energy. You are not just looking for wheat. You are looking for the proof that other humans still exist in this frozen world. The interior of the settler's shanty is even darker and colder than your own. You find the man sitting by a small stove, his face a map of lines and shadows. There is no conversation, as per the rules of this quiet world. There is only the business of survival. You see the wheat, sacks and sacks of it, piled in the corner like treasure. It is a quirky piece of fringe history that some of these hidden stores of grain were actually the subject of intense, scholarly debate later on. Some historians wonder if the settlers who held onto their grain were being selfish, waiting for prices to rise, or if they were simply as trapped and terrified as everyone else. Looking at this man, you see only the latter. He is a ghost in a wooden box, holding onto his grain because it is the only thing that makes him feel like he still has a future. The journey back is a nightmare of weight and resistance. You are now pulling a small sled, a makeshift thing made of 2 boards and some wire, loaded with a precious 100 pounds of wheat. The sled wants to tip, it wants to sink, it wants to snag on every ridge of ice. The wind has shifted, and now it is blowing directly into your face. The tiny grains of ice strike your skin like needles, find the gaps in your scarf, and turn your breath into a mask of frost on your muffler. Every step is a battle of will. You find yourself counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4. You tell yourself that you only have to make it to the next ridge. Then the next. You are a machine made of frozen wool and solitude scones. The humor is harder to find now, but it's there in the absurdity of your situation. You are currently the most important logistical operation in the territory. You are a one-person supply chain, a last-mile delivery service that involves more frostbite and less cardboard than the future versions. You imagine yourself with a little blue cap and a scanner, trying to find the barcode on a snowdrift. You realize that you are literally carrying the lives of people in those burlap sacks. If you stop, the fire in your stove and the fires in the stoves of your neighbors will eventually go out. That thought provides a strange, cold clarity. It is the fuel that keeps your legs moving when your muscles are screaming for rest. As the sun begins to set, the world turns a deep, bruised purple. The temperature drops even further, a physical weight that seems to slow the very movement of your blood. You see the familiar silhouette of your own town, or what's left of it above the snow. The buildings look like small, dark ships wrecked on a white reef. You reach the outskirts, and you see the first yellow light of a lantern in a window. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It is a warm, defiant spark in the dark, a signal that the world is still there. You pull the sled into the main street, the runners making a long, singing hiss against the frozen ground. Historians still argue whether these individual acts of bravery were what truly saved the settlements of the plains, or if it was simply a matter of statistics. That enough people had enough supplies to endure until the weather broke. But as you feel the hands of your neighbors helping you unhitch the sled, you know that statistics have nothing to do with it. It is about the refusal to be silent. It is about the person who goes out into the void, because staying behind is no longer an option. You watch as the wheat is divided, small portions being carried away into the dark to be ground in dozens of coffee mills. You have brought the sun back to the town, one kernel at a time. You finally reach your own shanty. You move through the trench, the walls of snow feeling like the arms of an old friend. You duck inside and close the door, the click of the latch sounding like a final period at the end of a very long sentence. You are too tired to eat, too tired even to take off your boots. You sit on the floor by the cold stove, your head resting against the newspaper-covered wall. You look at the small bag of wheat you kept for yourself, the golden kernels spilling out onto the floorboards. You have survived the journey. You have navigated the void and returned with the prize. The shanty is silent, but it is no longer heavy. It is a space filled with the memory of movement and the promise of a meal. You feel the heat slowly returning to your limbs, a painful, tingling thaw that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. You realize that you have a new relationship with the landscape. The prairie is no longer just a place where you live. It is a force that you have looked in the eye. You have seen its absolute power and its absolute indifference. And you are still here. You are a part of the history of the snow, a footnote that refused to be erased. The humor returns as you look at your charcoal mask. In the mirror, you look like a Victorian chimney sweep who took a wrong turn at the North Pole. You imagine trying to explain your current appearance to someone from a different time. Oh, it's the latest in high-altitude prairie fashion. It's called the Desperate Trek, and it comes with complimentary frostbite. You find yourself smiling, a slow, stiff movement of your face that cracks the ice on your cheeks. You are a survivor. You are a provider. You are a person of the long winter, and you have earned your rest. You finally manage to pull off your boots and your layers, the clothes piling up on the floor like the shed skin of a very large, very cold snake. You climb into your bed, the corn husk mattress feeling like a cloud of pure gold. You pull the quilts up to your chin, the weight of them a familiar comfort. You are warm, or at least you are no longer freezing. You listen to the wind outside, which is starting to howl again, but it sounds distant now, like a storm on another planet. You have done your part. You have searched for life in the snow, and you found it. As you drift toward sleep, you think about the mainstream heroes of history, the generals and the kings. You decide that they have nothing on a person with a sled and a charcoal mask. The history of the world is made of moments like this, small, silent victories against an infinite cold. You let your breathing slow, the rhythm of your heart matching the steady, quiet pulse of the shanty. You are drifting, floating, sinking into a sleep that is as deep and restorative as the spring you know is coming. You think about the settler in his dark house, and you hope he is warm. You think about the neighbors grinding their wheat, and you hope their bread is sweet. You are a part of a tapestry of survival, a single thread that held firm when the wind tried to tear it away. You are safe. You are home. The long winter has one more chapter to tell, but you have already written the most important lines. You close your eyes, and the white world fades into a soft, velvet dark, leaving you alone with the warmth of your own heart. The calendar on your wall, with its hand-drawn squares and faded ink, tells you that it is now the month of April. In any other year, April would mean the smell of damp earth and the sight of small, green shoots pushing through the mud. But as you look out through the small porthole you have kept clear in your window frost, you still see a world of white. The drifts are still higher than the roof of your barn, and the wind still carries a sharp, biting edge that speaks of the Arctic. You begin to wonder if the world has simply forgotten how to be warm. You wonder if the sun has lost its strength, or if the prairie has decided to remain a frozen kingdom forever. You sit by your stove, which is still being fed by the last remaining scraps of twisted hay and the very bottom of your wheat bag. The snow blockade has lasted for nearly 6 months, and the isolation has become a part of your soul. You are a person of the ice, a creature of the dark, and the idea of a world with green grass and warm rain feels like a dream from a life you lived 1,000 years ago. But then, one morning, you notice a change. It is not a loud or sudden thing. It starts with the light. For months, the light has been a flat, sterile gray or a sharp, electric blue. But today, as the sun rises over the eastern horizon, the light has a touch of gold in it. It feels heavier, more substantial. You watch as a single beam of sunlight strikes the frost on your window. Instead of just illuminating the ice, the light seems to sink into it. You see a tiny, glistening bead of water form on one of the crystalline ferns. It hangs there for a long moment, catching the golden light like a tiny diamond, and then it slides down the glass. It is a small movement, almost invisible, but to you, it is as significant as a mountain moving. It is the first sign of the great thaw. You realize that the sun has finally returned from its long winter exile, and it has brought the spring back with it. You move to the door and push it open. For the first time in months, the door does not groan against a wall of packed snow. The air that greets you is not the dry, freezing needles of January. It is soft, moist, and carries the faint, intoxicating scent of melting ice. You step out into your trench, and you hear a sound that you haven't heard since October. It is the sound of dripping. From the edges of your roof, from the tops of the drifts, from the branches of the few stunted trees near the slough, water is beginning to move. It is a rhythmic, musical sound, a symphony of tinkling and splashing that fills the silence of the prairie. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of the long winter was truly broken by the sight of the first bird or the sound of the first melt. But for you, the sound of the water is the voice of hope itself. It is the sound of the world waking up after a very long and very cold sleep. You walk along the path toward the town, and the experience is entirely different from your wit trek of a few weeks ago. The snow is no longer a hard, brittle marble. It has become honeycombed and soft. It is a quirky tidbit of history that pioneers called this rotten snow, a stage where the ice looks solid but collapses into a slushy mess the moment you step on it. You find yourself sinking into the drifts, but instead of the terrifying cold of the midwinter, the slush is just wet and heavy. You are currently participating in the world's most exhausting obstacle course, where every step involves a splash and a squelch. You imagine a modern fitness trainer calling this aquatic resistance training, while you would much rather be wearing a pair of waterproof boots that actually worked. You realize that your boots, which you greased so carefully, are finally meeting their match. You are walking in a world of pioneer mud, a substance that is part water, part ice, and part the very soul of the prairie. As you reach the town, you see the other settlers emerging from their houses. They look like pale shadows of the people they were in the fall. Faces are thin, eyes are bright with a strange, weary joy, and everyone is covered in the dust of hay and the soot of the coffee mill fires. There is still no talking, but the silence has changed. It is now a silence of shared anticipation. Everyone is looking toward the south, toward the place where the railroad tracks are buried. You find yourself standing on the platform of the station, the same place where you watched the last train disappear so many months ago. The tracks are still invisible, hidden under several feet of slush and water, but you can feel a vibration in the air. It is a deep, low thrumming that seems to come from the earth itself. Then, from far away, drifting across the wet, glistening miles of the prairie, you hear it. It is a sound that makes your heart skip a beat. It is the whistle of a steam locomotive. It is not the mournful, desperate whistle of the fall. It is a long, triumphant blast that echoes off the melting drifts. The first train of the spring is coming. Mainstream history records that the first train to break the blockade in April 1881 was greeted with celebrations that rivaled the 4th of July. In your town, the celebration is quieter but deeper. You watch as a massive engine, equipped with a heavy plow, rounds the bend. It is moving slowly, pushing through the slush and the mud, its wheels spinning on the wet iron. It looks like a great, dark whale breaching the surface of a white sea. The train pulls into the station, and the steam bellows out in a warm, white cloud. The smell of burning coal and hot oil fills the air, and for once, it is the most beautiful perfume you can imagine. The cars behind the engine are loaded with everything the territory has been dreaming of for 6 months. There are sacks of white flour, crates of sugar, fresh meat, and mountains of coal. But there are also things you didn't know you missed until you saw them. There are crates of oranges, their bright skin looking like pieces of the sun. There are bundles of newspapers that are only a few days old, filled with news of a world that is moving forward. There are letters, thousands of letters, carrying the voices of families who have been waiting in the dark for news of their loved ones on the plains. A quirky piece of history from this first train is that some people were so overwhelmed by the return of luxury items that they began to eat plain white sugar by the handful. Right there on the platform, you find yourself doing something similar with a piece of fresh bread that a train hand tosses to you. It is soft, white, and tastes like a miracle. You realize that your relationship with the coffee mill is officially over. You imagine a future where the coffee mill is kept as a decorative antique on a shelf, and you find yourself laughing at the thought. You would rather use it as a boat anchor than ever turn that handle again for a meal. You feel the weight of the winter lifting off your shoulders, a physical lightness that makes you feel like you could float away over the melting snow. As the days pass, the thaw accelerates. The prairie transforms before your eyes. The massive drifts shrink and collapse, turning into rushing streams of water that fill the sloughs and the coulees. The sound of the water becomes a constant roar, a powerful reminder of the life that was hidden beneath the ice. You notice the return of the wildlife. A flock of Canada geese flies overhead, their honking. A loud and joyous announcement of the change in seasons. You see a hawk circling in the warm updrafts, looking for the small animals that are also emerging from their burrows. You find yourself looking for the muskrats, wondering if they are enjoying their renovated houses now that the ice is gone. You decide that they are probably the most satisfied residents of the territory, having known all along that they were built for this. The ground begins to appear in patches, dark, rich soil that has been resting under the snow for half a year. It is wet and muddy, but it is the most beautiful sight you have ever seen. It is the promise of the next harvest, the evidence that the earth is still fertile and ready. You think about the scholarly debates about pioneer resilience and whether this winter changed the character of the people who stayed. You realize that the resilience wasn't just about surviving the cold. It was about the ability to see the mud and recognize it as a gift. It was about the stubbornness required to wait for the sun. You feel a deep, quiet pride in the fact that you are still here. You have been tested by the most brutal season in history, and you did not break. You are a person of the prairie, and you have earned your place in its history. The humor returns as you begin the great unlayering. You spend an afternoon taking off the extra socks, the wool vests, and the heavy coats that have been your second skin for months. You feel like a butterfly emerging from a very scratchy, very dusty cocoon. You look at your pile of winter clothes and decide that they need a very long bath in some of that. Hey, ash soap, you heard about. You imagine a future where people have seasonal wardrobes, and you realize that your seasonal wardrobe for the last 6 months has just been everything I own, all at once. You find yourself smiling at the thought of a world where you can walk outside in just a shirt and feel the breeze on your skin. You return to your shanty and begin the work of the spring. You scrape the newspaper off the walls, revealing the clean pine boards beneath. You wash the windows, removing the last of the frost and the soot, letting the bright, golden light flood the room. The shanty no longer feels like a fortress or a burrow. It feels like a home. You look at the coffee mill, still bolted to the wall, and you give the handle a single gentle turn. It makes a quiet, rhythmic sound, a reminder of the hours you spent in the dark. You decide to leave it there, not as a tool for survival, but as a monument to the endurance of the human heart. It is a part of your story now, a part of the legend of the long winter. The sun begins to set, but it is a late, lingering sunset of spring. The sky is filled with shades of pink, orange, and gold, reflecting off the pools of water that cover the land. The world is a mosaic of dark earth and sparkling blue, a landscape that is being reborn with every passing hour. You sit on your doorstep and breathe in the air. It is cool but not cold, fresh and full of the scent of growing things. You feel a sense of peace that is as deep as the snow was high. The long winter is over. The snow blockade has been broken. The tracks are clear, the grain is moving, and the sun is here to stay. You think about the historians of the future and what they will say about the winter of 1880. They will talk about the blizzards, the trains, and the wet treks. They will analyze the weather patterns and the economic impacts. But they will never truly know what it felt like to hear that first drip of water or to taste that first piece of white bread. They will never know the weight of the silence or the beauty of the return of the light. Only you know. You and the thousands of other silent souls who stood their ground against the ice. You are the true keepers of the history, the ones who lived the words that the books can only approximate. As you sit there in the twilight, you feel the warmth of the day still lingering in the wood of the shanty. You watch the stars begin to appear in the vast, clear sky. They are the same stars you watched through the blizzards, but tonight they look different. They look like friendly lights, watching over a world that is safe and warm. You find yourself drifting into a state of quiet reflection. You have seen the worst that the earth can offer, and you have seen the best. You have learned that life is a cycle of fire and fodder, of grinding and growing, and that the spring is always worth the wait. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the prairie wash over you. The roar of the water, the call of the geese, the soft rustle of the wind in the old grass. It is a beautiful, complex song, a song of survival and renewal. You realize that you are no longer the same person who stood on this spot in October. You are stronger, quieter, and more deeply rooted in the land. You have become a part of the Dakota Territory, a part of its soil and its sky. The long winter didn't just happen to you, it became a part of you. And as you open your eyes and look at the first green blade of grass pushing through the mud at your feet, you know that you are ready for whatever comes next. The light fades into a soft, velvet dark, but it is a darkness that holds no fear. It is a warm, domestic dark, the kind that invites sleep and dreams. You move back inside your shanty and lie down on your bed. The corn husk mattress is still there, but you don't need the 6 heavy quilts tonight. You only need one. You pull it up to your chin and feel the familiar weight. You are safe. You are warm. You are home. The history of the long winter has reached its final page, and the story of the spring is just beginning. You let your breathing slow, matching the rhythmic dripping of the eaves. You are drifting, floating, sinking into a sleep that is as sweet and peaceful as the golden April sun. The world is growing very quiet now, and the memory of the snow is fading into a soft, white mist. You can feel the warmth of the spring air moving through the room, a gentle breath that carries the scent of the awakening earth. Your journey through the long winter is complete. You have faced the wind, you have turned the mill, and you have walked through the void. You have earned this rest. Let your mind wander back to the golden fields of the summer, where the tall grass ripples like a gentle sea. The sun is high, the air is warm, and the world is full of life. There are no blizzards here, no frozen windows, and no hungry silences. There is only the endless, golden light and the steady, peaceful rhythm of the prairie. As you drift deeper into sleep, the sounds of the world outside become a distant hum, a soft lullaby sung by the wind. You are safe in your fortress of wood and memory. The stars are watching over you, and the moon is casting a silver light over the melting drifts. Everything is as it should be. The cycle of the year has turned, and the light has returned to the world. You are a part of the history of the sun, a silent witness to the beauty of the thaw. Let go of the worries of the day, the memories of the cold, and the weight of the work. This is your time to rest, to heal, and to dream of the green grass and the warm rain. The shadows in the room are soft and long, moving slowly as the night progresses. You are floating on a sea of peace, a calm and quiet ocean that has no end. The story of the long winter is a memory now, a tale told to the fire on a quiet night. You are the hero of that story, the one who stayed, the one who endured, and the one who saw the sun return. Sleep now, and let the warmth of the spring wrap around you like a heavy, velvet blanket. The world is at peace, the winter is gone, and the morning will bring a bright and golden light. Sweet dreams of the prairie, sweet dreams of the sun, and sweet dreams of the long, gentle spring.